If you have your Bibles, go be turning to Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32. As we continue our journey through the life of Jacob, the beginning of Israel, seeing this man change from a rascal to a righteous man. Last week when we were together, we talked about the fact that he was still struggling and making his own plans. He had his own plans worked out. You remember he had gotten a promise from God, and he said, God, I know that you're going to fulfill that promise. All of a sudden, he goes to sleep, remember, and wakes up the next morning, and he says, I got to have a plan. My plan and his plan was to go and to send out that companies, those three different droves of his animals and servants, and to go to meet Esau and to tell Esau, you know, this is from Jacob, your servant. You are considered his Lord, in order to try to appease him. Remember that? He wanted to appease him, and when he's trying to appease Esau, he does not know whether or not it will work. We find out that appeasing God doesn't work either. What needed to happen with Esau, he needed to have a heart change. And that's what had to happen with our relationship with God. We had to have heart change. God changed his heart towards us because of what his son did for us. And once that heart change happens, then there's fellowship and great relationship and security and confidence in that. And that's what happened to Esau, as we saw in chapter 33. As we read on ahead, we saw that Esau's heart had changed. He came and hugged his brother and kissed him and wept over him and didn't even know why he had sent those things, because it wasn't necessary. He had plenty, and he didn't know why he had to send it. And remember, Jacob said, no, even though I'm not sent it to appease you anymore, I want to give it to you because I love you, because I'm grateful for you. And we talked about what we do for God is we don't give things to God or do things for God in order to appease God. We're not to appease Him, but rather we give things to God because we love Him and because we're grateful for what God has done in our life. Well, between that experience of him sending those three droves of animals and him meeting Esau, we skipped a portion in here that is probably the most significant portion in the life of Jacob. It actually has to do whenever he is converted. Whenever God brings Jacob to a place to where he must have a heart change. Remember, Jacob has been that man ever since he was born. He was called the one who grabs you by the heel. He was the old deceiver, the old trickster. And he's lived down to his name, as we talked about that, over and over again. And even though he had encounters with angels, at the ladder he had encounters with angels, and he made a commitment to serve God and to give a tithe. You remember that? And on his way back, he realized that God was in the camp with him as he is journeying back, that God was walking. Even though he had those encounters with the angels of God and had these experiences with God, his heart had not changed. And so now comes the time when God is going to grab hold of Jacob. God is going to do something in Jacob to bring him to a place of conversion, to bring him to a place where his heart is changed, where he's allowing God to do something in the innermost part of him. God is the one who takes the initiative in this matter. Now, I want you to write this down. If you're saved today, I want you to understand something. God took the initiative in your life too. I hope you don't think you found God one day. God found you. He's done everything to save your soul. And He has done everything to get you to that place to where your heart would be changed. And this is the conversion experience of Jacob. Now, I want you to listen carefully, because I really believe it's a two-part message this week and next week. I really believe if you'll listen carefully, the Holy Spirit of God has got some words for us. Has some words for us about some struggles we have in life, some difficulties we have in life, and how God is busy working in our lives, and sometimes that's a struggle. And where God ultimately wants us to be and what He considers priority in our life. And all of that's going to come from this passage. Today I want to just read, beginning in verse 22, just a few verses as we begin this journey of Jacob's conversion. Verse 22 of chapter 32. Now he arose that same night, and he took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. Underline this phrase. Then Jacob was left alone. Then Jacob was left alone. Underline this phrase. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Let's go on and read until you see the rest of the story in case you're not familiar with it. Verse 27. So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip. I hope you leave your Bibles open as we look at the first part of this story. After he had made that plan, he sent those droves on to see how Esau is going to respond. It says, later that night, he took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children and had them to cross the ford of the Jabbok River. In verse 23, it says, and he took them, talking about his family, and he sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had, whatever he possessed, and the result was, then Jacob was left alone. One truth that you need to understand this is that what God works towards and what God wants in order to do a work in your life, He wants to find you alone. God needs to get you alone to do a work in your life. Jacob had to send his family, his 2 wives, his 2 maids, his 11 children. He sent his family over across the ford of the Jabbok. But that isn't all he did, and it said just his family. It says he also sent everything he owned, everything he possessed, everything that was Jacob. He sent it over to the other side, and he stays on this side. I don't know why. I guess the Spirit of God may be leading him. I don't know why he chose to do that, but he was there on that side. It could have been a very natural reason. He thought, well, if Esau is going to come and sneak up and attack me, then I want him to find me over here and my family will be safe. No one knows exactly why it was, but I can tell you what God engineered. God needed him to be alone. God needed for him to send his wives and children over so that he's not concerned about them. He needed for Jacob to send all of his possessions and all of his responsibilities and all that he'd accumulated in his life. He needed to send it to the other side of the Jabbok, and he needed to be right by himself. He needed to be alone. He needed to be reduced to just himself. Just him and God. You know, that's the way God deals with each of us and all of us. God has to work to get us alone. Because so many of us, we are not alone. We are a summation of all we have around us or who we have to relate to us. Too many of us do not see ourselves for who we are because we can see how we relate to that child of mine or that wife of mine or that family member of mine or that person who's a significant other of mine. This is who I am because I'm relating to them. This is who I am because what I mean to them. And we can think about ourselves in relationship to all kinds of relationships that we miss out who we are before God. God needs for us to get alone. You know why? Because that's where we're going to stand one day before God. We're not going to stand before God with all the people coming that we're related to. We're not going to stand before God in order to have character witnesses to come before God and tell God how good we are and how wonderful we did things in this world. It's not going to be that way. One day, we're going to stand alone before God, and God needs to get us alone here so He can get us right. He doesn't only need to separate us from our people, He needs to separate us from our possessions and our things. Because if we're not careful, we can think that we're the summation of all the things we have. Well, look at my life. There's my house, and there's my car, and there's what I got in the bank, and there's what I have on my wall that says that I had with my education, or the accolades that I have, and this is what I possess, and this is what I owe, and this is who I am to everyone. We can get so many things attached to us. We put all those little flowers all over our lives. We got flowers everywhere, but you know what it says when it comes to time, stand before God? All the flowers will fade away. And all that will be between you and God is you and God. And so in order to have business with God, in order for God to do business with us, He needs to get us alone. And He found that Jacob was alone. On that side of the Jabbok, he was alone. And God, finding Jacob alone, is going to do business with him. Now, He's going to do business in probably one of the more particular or peculiar ways that you've ever read anywhere in the Bible. This is what it says, verse 24. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. A man comes up where Jacob is, and a man begins to grab hold of him and struggle with him and wrestle with him. Now, here it says that it's a man. Hosea's account in Hosea 12, verses 3 through 4, says it's an angel. We'll talk about who that is. Well, let me ask you this question. Who do you think that Jacob thought it was? I mean, whenever it happened, and you know, he's already afraid of his brother. And he's already sending all those presents to his brother, hoping his brother will not do what he said he would do, and that's kill him. He'd already threatened to kill him, and he knew his brother was coming with 400 men. Whenever Jacob is over there by himself, and this angel of God or whatever comes and jumps on him, who do you think that Jacob thought it was? He thought it was Esau. I bet he thought it was Esau. He thought, my old brother's, he's followed my example. He done tricked me. He's deceived me, snuck up on me. I guarantee you, he first thought it was Esau. If it wasn't Esau, he probably thought it was one of Esau's men. Maybe an assassin that Esau had sent from his group to go and to find Jacob while it is still a distance away and it's dark, and to kill Jacob so Esau does not have to do it himself. He probably thought it was not Esau, it was Esau's man. Or maybe he thought that it was just a thief or a thug. Somebody who came along, saw him by himself. All the others are over there. He's out here by himself. So just jump on him and steal from him whatever he has and mar him in life. It was a thug, a thief. Or maybe he thought, like some people believe, that it was a river demon, because they believed in river demons. That here he was by himself, nobody around him, and out of the river jumps the demon and is whipping him, is wrestling with him, is struggling with him. I don't know who he thought that it was, but I can tell you one person he did not think it was. It never crossed his mind that he was wrestling with God. That's not the first thing that ever crossed his mind, that he was wrestling with God. But he was. He eventually realizes that. he eventually realizes that he's wrestling with God, or a messenger from God at least. The reason you know that he eventually knows that is because as the battle goes on and it is approaching daybreak, as the battle goes on, it is Jacob who holds on to this man or this angel, and he says to him, "Bless me." He would only have asked that if he knew that this was a messenger or an angel of God who could bless him. So I don't know what happened in that battle, and I don't know what took place in that battle, but I can tell you one thing. When that wrestle was going on, something happened in Jacob's mind, and he realized this is not a man, this is not a demon, this is not a thug, this is not Esau. I'm doing battle with God. I'm doing battle with God. The old tradition says the rabbis, whenever they taught this story, the tradition was this, that this was actually Jacob's guardian angel. And the thought was, he's so bad, even the angel supposed to be guarding him had to beat up on him a while. Now you're pretty bad when your guardian angel's beating up on you. Well, it was an angel of God, a messenger of God. More than likely, it was a theophany. It was a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. It's probably Jesus that's sitting there who's wrestling with Jacob. And he's wrestling with Jacob because he wants Jacob to change. He wants Jacob to have an experience with him. He wants him to be different. And he's wrestling with him. In order to bring that about, he's struggling. But see, Jacob came to understand that he was struggling with God. Ron Dunn, dealing with this passage, great preacher, died 2001. He was one of the greatest expositors of our day. But when he was dealing with this passage, he made the statement, he said, you know, a great discovery that we make, listen to this, if you don't hear another thing, listen to this. One of the great discoveries that we make is that our biggest struggles in life are our struggles with God, not with others and not with the devil. Our biggest struggles in life are with God. He went on to say, I find it at times easier to say no to the devil than to say yes to God. Think about that. I find it at times easier to say no to the devil than to say yes to God. That's true in biblical accounts. Let me give you a few. In Genesis chapter 17, verse 18, Ishmael had been born, remember, born to Abraham through Sarah's scheming and Hagar. Ishmael is born, and God comes to Abraham, and God tells Abraham that Ishmael shall not be the promised child. He shall not be the one through whom you have the descendants. He is not the promised one, but rather there will be one born of Sarah. And Abraham, he struggles with God. And he says, oh God, that Ishmael may be accepted in your sight. You know what his struggle was? He loved Ishmael. He was his son. And he wanted God to let Ishmael be it. And he struggled when God said he can't be, but it's going to be a child of promise through Sarah. What about Moses and his struggle? Moses' struggle is not when he goes to see Pharaoh. When he says, let my people go. Moses' struggle is when he's at the burning bush. And God calls him to go and to be that messenger, to be that deliverer. And he says, I can't. I'm not qualified. I don't speak well. Who am I? His biggest struggle was with God, not with man, or even with the enemy. Even with the enemy. Take the book of Job. We know all about the book of Job, don't we? We all feel like we've been there sometime. Boy, I tell you, I'm Job of this day. You know an interesting thing about Job? Job's struggle in that book of some 49 chapters, Job's struggle is never with the devil. Go read it. He never mentions the devil. The devil is a minor role in that book. He only is in there 2 chapters. He's only in there for 2 chapters. And whenever Job states, God gives, he didn't say the devil takes away, did he? He said, God gives and God takes away. See, the struggle with Job is not the struggle that he had with the enemy. The struggle that Job has is the struggle he has with God. And read that book, my friend. It's not a passive experience of being submission. It's a direct encounter, an active encounter of resisting and not understanding the ways and the will of God. That book's about a struggle with God, not a struggle with the enemy. You could pull out many, many passages. Let me end with this one. What about the Son of God? The Son of God goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. And he falls there at the Garden of Gethsemane and he prays. And what does he pray? Father, if this cup can pass from me, let it. But not my will, but thy will be done. 3 times he goes and he prays. And he asks that of God. You know what it says that happens? Read it when you get home. You know what it says happens after his experience of the Garden of Gethsemane? It said he sweat drops of blood. You remember that? He sweat drops of blood and he was ministered to. And that struggle was with who? With God. Hold on a second. When he began his ministry, he went 40 days in the wilderness, fasting. The devil came and tempted him on 3 different occasions to try to get him to falter and fail. After he stood and withstood the attack and temptation of the enemy, it says, and angels came and ministered to him, but not one place does it say that he had sweat drops of blood. The greatest struggle for Jesus was not with the devil. It was with saying yes to God. Yes to God. And in our lives, we struggle with the same thing. When God puts before us an experience, a situation, a circumstance, a difficulty in our lives, and God lays that before us, and we have to be willing to say, God, I know that you're loving, and God, I know you're all-knowing, and God, I know that you're full of mercy, and God, I know that you have loving kindness in your heart. I know that. But I don't want to receive this. I don't want that in my life. I don't want that in my family. I don't want that in my experience. But God waits for us to say yes. For us to say yes. Because He waits for us to get to a point where we trust Him. When we cannot see. And our struggle is with God. Interesting thing about that struggle, though. Notice what it says there in verse 24. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man, an angel, Jesus, I believe, listen what it says, wrestled with him. Very important that you see that word. He wrestled with him. He didn't fight him. He wrestled with him. He didn't punch him or hit him. He wrestled with him. Why is that important? Because this is the truth, my friend. If you came up and you punched me in the nose and I didn't want to fight, I can run. I can exit the premises. I can escape if I choose to, right? If you just punch me, fight with me, I can leave. But if you wrestle me, that means to grab hold. When you wrestle me, you grab hold of me, and I cannot leave until you let me go. I don't have a choice in that matter. If you are strong enough, you can hold me until you are ready to let me go. Let me tell you something. When you're wrestling with God, give up. He's stronger than you. You're not going to break his hold. He's got a hold of you. You know what? That man, that angel of God, grabbed hold of Jacob, wrestling with him, and he's not going to let him go until what? Listen what it says. Until daybreak. Until daybreak. Daybreak, what does that mean? Let me tell you what it means in our experience. God is going to hold on to you, and he's going to wrestle with you, and you're going to get worn out. And he's going to keep holding on to you till you finally let the daylight shine in. Till you finally come to the day when you see and understand. You can't understand things in the night, can you? You don't understand things in the dark. You can't make it out. You know when you get a picture of something? When daybreak comes. When daylight shows up, when daybreak comes, now I can see, now I can get a hold of things, now I can put an image there, now I got meaning. Do you know when God is going to let go of you and me? You know when he lets that happen? When we let daybreak come. When we say, okay, God, I understand. God, I see. God, I trust you. My emotions might not be there. I might not feel great about it, but I trust you. And I let you have your will and your way. And the Lord lets us go. He sets us free. Let me tell you something. As long as you hold on, you may think you're going to wear God out. You won't, I promise you. You will not wear God out. He will not get tired. And you can do all the pouting you want to do. People walk around pouting all the time. I don't like it, and I don't like it. He ain't going to let you go because you're pouting. He's not going to let you go because you badmouth him. He's not going to let you go for any other reason than when you let daybreak come. And when daybreak comes and you say, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. I see. Yes, Lord. I understand. Yes, Lord. I trust you. He'll let you go. And as we'll see next week, he won't just let you go. He lets you receive a blessing from him. He will let you receive a blessing from him. Final thing today, though, look what it says. Verse 25. When he saw that he had not prevailed, talking about that angel, he's wrestling with Jacob, but he's not getting it across to him. He's not winning. Jacob's not surrendering. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. All he had to do was just touch the socket of his thigh, so that the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. He cheated, didn't he? That old angel cheated. Has the power to go and dislocate, just by touching his socket of his thigh, dislocated his hip. Hold on a second. And as far as most theologians and historians, they believe this, that his hip stayed dislocated. He walked with a limp the rest of his life. He walked with a limp the rest of his life. Well, that don't seem fair. Where's God in that? He's all over it. Let me tell you where God is in that. God is interested and puts priority on the things that matter in your life. And most of those things we get mixed up about. God is far more interested in the eternal things of your life than the temporal things of your life. God is far more concerned about developing that which will last than that which will not last. God is more concerned about growing you spiritually and soulishly in your life, because your spirit and your soul are going to last forever. And He's wanting to make those into the image of His Son. And His priority and His goal is to form and shape and make you spiritually. Not physically. Not materially. Not in what you possess. All that stuff is temporal. It is temporal. It is not going to be here. Now let me give you kind of an illustration of that. How many of you spend a whole lot of time looking and finding the design of toilet paper that you want to be on your roll? I mean, I don't know about y'all, but white is fine with me. How much time do you spend looking for a hand towel that matches the color of your bathroom tile and paint and floor? Spend a whole lot more time than you do on the toilet paper, don't you? Because that's going to be there longer than that roll of toilet paper. Well, our problem in life is we're more concerned about God dealing with our toilet paper rolls than we are the hand towel. We want God to make sure our toilet paper rolls are just perfect and wonderful. And the things that matter, we act like God shouldn't care about. Well, I don't care what you think or I think. God is in the business of dealing with that which is eternal. And if it means that you walk around with a limp the rest of your life so that your heart will be changed, you'll be limping. And if it means you walk around and you don't have the possessions that you think you ought to have in order for Him to get you where you ought to be spiritually and eternally and what matters, then that is what He will do. Because He cares about what lasts. He wasn't interested in Jacob's possessions. He was interested in Jacob's heart. And he knew what needed to happen was that old deceitful, wretched, scheming, trickster heart needed to be changed. And it needed to be changed from Jacob to Israel. One who strives with God and man and prevails. That change needed to happen. And the stuff that happens in our lives and the things that come in our lives, they're so that God can grow us up, form us, shape us, and mold us eternally to be what He wants us to be. In my journey of these years and seeing people, watching people, most people who have a spiritual depth, a spiritual understanding of things beyond just the surface matters, almost every one of those have had to wrestle with God. They faced things in their life they did not sign up for and would not want. But God has brought that into their life in order to mold them and make them and shape them and who they ought to be. I've seen some believers get totally worn out because they wouldn't just say, "Yes, Lord." But it's okay. They can be worn out. God's still right there with them. It's kind of up to us what we want to do, how we want to approach it, how we journey through it. But just go ahead and realize He wins. He wins. And He does it for your purpose, for your good, for your grace, for you to be the person that you ought to be. When I've seen spiritual giants along the way, it's usually because they've been places most of us wouldn't want to go. When I think about it, I think about a little lady. I was in Buras, Louisiana doing a revival one time. The first service I ever had there, I kind of got there and just sat on the front row. And she's over here and she's playing the piano. And man, she was one of those people that just blessed you, you know. She just smiled, and I guess she played by ear because she never looked down. You know, she's playing, she's smiling and all this. And just, I mean, it's just a joyful. Bro, I enjoyed just watching her while we played. And so I got up, preached that first message, and whenever we got through, the pastor said, I want you to come meet sister, I don't remember her name, sister so-and-so. And so I went over there, and I noticed that they had to take the wheelchair and had a ramp to run the wheelchair down from where the piano was. She's in a wheelchair. She wasn't just in a wheelchair, she had rheumatoid arthritis, and her fingers, I can't even describe how her fingers were, but her fingers were all bent and stiff as they could possibly be. But she sat there and beat that piano to death and could play that piano. And I thought about it, every time I think about that, all I ever saw of her to begin with was her face. And her face was full of joy and the love of Jesus when her body was broken down. And I have to let that be a prayer in my heart. Lord, please, don't let the little hangnails I have, don't let the little problems of aches and pains of my life make my heart bitter. If that sweet lady can go through what she's gone through and have a loving, sweet, excited heart about Jesus, how could I ever complain? How could I ever complain? Your biggest, greatest battles will be your struggle with God. But He only grabs hold of you because He wants to change you. Not for the worse, for the better. Give in. Give in, and then you'll see next week you have a chance to ask Him for a blessing. And He'll give that blessing.